Thunder rolled over Ndiwa as the drums fell silent, and the air tasted of iron and dust. Amara said, "Elder Nia, why does the ground tremble like a beast?" Sparks flickered around the shrine where the eternal flame once burned bright. Elder Nia pressed a cowrie necklace to her chest, and her voice shook like a reed. Elder Nia said, "Listen to your ancestors, child, for the night brings a verdict." A wind knifed through the baobab grove, and the sacred brazier sighed into darkness. Kato stepped forward with a hunter's caution, scanning the shadows. Kato said, "Tracks lead to the river, but none return." A figure cloaked in crimson stood beyond the incense smoke, and gold rings flashed like fangs. Obasi said, "The flame is weak, because the old ways are weak." Elder Nia knelt, and tears cut clean lines through ash on her cheeks. Elder Nia said, "A curse has awakened, older than our first fire." The cowrie necklace cracked like a seed pod, and a cold hush seized the village. Amara said, "If the land bleeds, I will follow its wound to the source." Lightning split the sky, and the shrine door blew inward like a gasp. A jackal howl braided with the storm, and the drums began again in fear. Morning crawled in gray, and smoke from cooking fires drew thin prayers into the sky. Amara said, "The flame's silence feels like a stopped heartbeat." Elder Nia traced symbols in sand and listened for echoes from the other side. Elder Nia said, "The land hears us, but something devours the answers." Kato searched the palisade, and his boots scuffed fear into the dust. Kato said, "Reed boats are missing, and nets lie cut like old bonds." Obasi stood among the elders with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Obasi said, "We must invite new power and retire cracked rituals." A murmur rippled through Ndiwa like dry grass before a spark. Children stared at the shrine and clutched gourds as if they held thunder. Elder Nia said, "Without the eternal flame, drought will ride our fields." Amara held the staff low, and her shadow stretched toward the river. Amara said, "If our roots are threatened, I will descend to the source." The elders argued like birds in a thorn tree, and dust motes danced between their hands. At the river bend, reeds whispered like secret tongues, and fish bones glimmered in a nest of mud. Kato said, "3 boats taken, all under moon's cover." Amara crouched, and wet earth cooled the heat in her breath. Amara said, "These cuts are too clean for panic." A charm made of bone and black thread hung from a reed like a warning. Elder Nia said, "This knot speaks of debts owed to restless spirits." Obasi arrived with guards and a practiced frown. Obasi said, "Bandits toy with us because we cling to ashes." A kingfisher burst from water, and blue shards peppered the morning. Amara said, "Who profits if our courage breaks first?" Kato lifted the charm with a twig, and flies rose like smoke. Elder Nia said, "A door opens when fear is named." The river answered with silence that felt like a sealed mouth, and the sky held back rain it could not spare. The council hut breathed heat, and woven mats creaked under shifting elders. Obasi said, "Trade caravans bring tools that never tire, and coin heals faster than songs." Elder Nia looked into the smoke hole where light fell like judgment. Elder Nia said, "Tools without spirit carve hollows in the heart." Amara felt eyes comb her face for weakness and for flame. Amara said, "The eternal flame is not an ornament, it is a covenant." Kato stood by the doorway like a wall that listens. Kato said, "If we choose haste, we choose blindfolds." Murmurs rose, and bracelets clinked like restless rain. Obasi said, "I will lead a new rite, and it will bend fortune to our hands." Elder Nia's staff tapped once, and silence gathered. Elder Nia said, "A rite without roots is only smoke." The hut seemed to tighten like a drumskin, and the storm outside checked its breath. Night returned with a copper moon, and the ancestral masks seemed to lean closer. Elder Nia said, "If the flame is stolen, its echo remains in the bones of the earth." She scattered ground cola at the threshold, and the kernels tapped like omens. Amara placed her palm on the shrine floor, and felt a pulse hiding under stone. Amara said, "The path points east along the old salt road." Kato tightened the strap on his spear and did not blink. Kato said, "Then I will walk 2 steps ahead of every shadow." From the darkness near the granary, Zuberi watched with a face like a sealed pot. Zuberi said, "Some doors open only to those who know the hinges." Obasi's voice drifted like smoke from outside the wall. Obasi said, "At dawn, we choose a future worthy of bold hands." Elder Nia said, "Remember, the land keeps receipts." The moon slid behind cloud, and the village held its breath for morning. The dawn cracked over Ndiwa with a sky pale as washed bone, and the air trembled with unease. Amara said, "Every drumbeat feels like it carries my bloodline's weight." Elder Nia drew lines in ash, whispering proverbs older than memory. Elder Nia said, "Your lineage is not burden, child, it is a compass forged in struggle." Kato scanned the horizon, his spear steady, his jaw tense. Kato said, "Shadows still trail us, even as the sun rises." Obasi's smile cut through the council's murmur like a knife. Obasi said, "Lineage is only an anchor to the past, power waits for those who seize today." Amara felt the village eyes upon her, heavy with doubt and hope. Amara said, "If the ancestors called me, then their echoes demand I answer." Elder Nia struck her staff, and sparks leapt like fireflies. Elder Nia said, "The eternal flame binds you, Amara. Its silence must be broken by your hand." The villagers hushed, and wind stirred dust like a warning from unseen spirits. The shrine's cracked walls glowed faintly, as if hiding embers of forgotten fire. Elder Nia said, "This place holds your ancestors' truth, Amara." Amara knelt, pressing her palm against cold stone that hummed with buried power. Amara said, "I feel the pulse like a heart buried beneath." Kato tightened his grip on the spear, unease crawling over his skin. Kato said, "If this is truth, then danger waits close." Obasi leaned against the wall, his robe catching candlelight, his voice like honey. Obasi said, "Every prophecy is a riddle, twisted to control the weak." Elder Nia lifted her gaze skyward, as if listening to voices beyond the veil. Elder Nia said, "The flame chooses not men hungry for crowns." The air shifted, and a faint crack echoed like a distant drum, making even the masks seem to breathe. The council gathered beneath the ancient baobab tree, where roots wound like chains across red soil. Obasi raised his arms, and his voice carried sharp as a blade. Obasi said, "Tradition binds us to suffering. I bring new strength." Elders shifted, uncertain, their beads rattling like nervous hearts. Elder Nia said, "A tree without roots withers, even if its leaves glisten." Amara stood tall though her knees trembled. Amara said, "Our roots are our armor, not our shackles." Kato's shadow stretched long, spear across his back like a vow. Kato said, "I follow no man who spits on ancestors." A hush fell, and whispers ran like dry leaves over stone. The baobab's hollow groaned, and a flock of birds exploded into the sky as if startled by something unseen. That night, the firelight painted the huts in amber, and silence pressed heavier than drums. Zuberi lingered near Amara, eyes burning with unspoken rivalry. Zuberi said, "You wear destiny like a crown meant for another." Amara clenched her staff, her breath quickened. Amara said, "If you wish my path, then walk in my shadow and see where it leads." Elder Nia sat by the embers, her gaze sorrowful but steady. Elder Nia said, "Blood must not fight blood, for division feeds the curse." Kato stepped forward, his presence like a shield. Kato said, "The village breaks only if we turn blades inward." Obasi's laugh carried from afar, sharp and mocking. Obasi said, "Division is already planted, it only needs water." Sparks drifted upward like lost stars as the night deepened into unease. The rain came before dawn, hard and relentless, pounding the thatched roofs and turning dust to rivers. Amara stood in the storm, her hair clinging to her face like vines. Amara said, "If the flame demands a journey, I will walk it." Elder Nia's voice rose through thunder, her staff lifted high. Elder Nia said, "The ancestors have chosen, but choice still burns within you." Kato braced himself against the wind, spear angled like lightning's twin. Kato said, "Then I stand at your side until the last drum beat." Zuberi turned away, his eyes shadowed, his jaw clenched like stone. Zuberi said, "Do not forget that bloodlines compete even when fate calls." Obasi's voice carried from the council hut, smooth and poisonous. Obasi said, "The kingdom craves leaders, not dreamers." The storm swallowed his words, but Amara's resolve cut brighter than lightning. The sun climbed over the horizon, gilding the salt road with gold dust, as Amara stepped beyond the village for the first time with destiny at her back. Amara said, "This path holds more than sand. It holds the bones of our story." Kato walked 2 strides ahead, his spear steady, eyes alert to danger. Kato said, "The land itself tests us. Even silence has teeth here." Elder Nia leaned on her staff, each step deliberate yet strong. Elder Nia said, "The ancestors walk beside us, their whispers etched into the wind." Zuberi lagged behind, his jaw tight, his gaze restless. Zuberi said, "Ancestors cannot shield us from blades of men." Birds burst from thorn trees, scattering into the dawn sky, and the scent of salt clung heavy in the air. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of promise and peril woven together. By midday the travelers reached a dry riverbed cracked like old skin, its stones echoing with forgotten floods. Amara knelt and traced lines in the dust. Amara said, "This river once fed the kingdom. Now it drinks only silence." Kato scanned the cliffs where shadows pooled. Kato said, "Tracks lead here but vanish into stone." Elder Nia lifted her staff and let dust settle through her fingers. Elder Nia said, "The land remembers every wound, even if men forget." Zuberi kicked a pebble and sneered at the silence. Zuberi said, "We follow ghosts while our enemies sharpen steel." A crow cawed from above, the sound sharp as iron, and the group pressed forward with the weight of thirst in their throats. As dusk neared, the group entered a forest alive with whispers, where vines twisted like snakes and shadows clung to every trunk. Amara gripped her staff, voice low but firm. Amara said, "These woods hold eyes we cannot see." Kato cut through a vine with his spear, jaw clenched. Kato said, "If eyes follow, they will find steel waiting." Elder Nia inhaled deeply, her eyes closing. Elder Nia said, "Spirits gather here, drawn to the pulse of your path." Zuberi smirked, though unease cracked his mask. Zuberi said, "Spirits cannot bleed, but men can." A rustle in the canopy sent birds shrieking upward, and silence pressed tighter than armor. The fire crackled in the clearing, sparks spiraling into the night as the travelers rested. Amara gazed into the flames, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. Amara said, "If this path ends in death, let it still serve the land." Kato sharpened his spear, his hands steady, voice quiet. Kato said, "Death has no hold on loyalty. I follow until the last breath." Elder Nia hummed a low song, her words woven with old tongues. Elder Nia said, "Fire remembers every face that sought its warmth." Zuberi leaned back, shadows dancing across his face. Zuberi said, "Songs will not shield us when the blade finds our backs." The wind shifted, carrying a howl from deep within the forest, and silence swallowed the flames for a heartbeat. Before dawn, mist thick as smoke clung to the clearing, and a figure moved in silence at the edge of camp. Amara woke, her instincts sharper than sleep. Amara said, "Someone stirs in the fog." Kato rose instantly, spear in hand, scanning shadows. Kato said, "Show yourself or meet steel." Elder Nia's staff tapped the earth once, her voice calm. Elder Nia said, "The forest does not hide without reason." Zuberi stepped forward from behind, his tone edged. Zuberi said, "Perhaps the forest hides what you do not wish to see." A branch cracked, and from the mist, a pair of glowing eyes blinked, holding them all still in its gaze. The forest thinned into a rocky plateau, where wind howled like a horn calling soldiers to march. Amara pressed her palm against a carved stone, its grooves glowing faintly. Amara said, "The path breathes with warnings carved by hands long gone." Elder Nia leaned close, her breath steady despite the climb. Elder Nia said, "These marks speak of betrayal, and of kin turned against kin." Kato circled, his spear lifted, eyes sharp. Kato said, "The stones shift, someone waits beyond." Zuberi scoffed, his lips tight with bitterness. Zuberi said, "The earth does not warn, it buries secrets no one should chase." Amara's chest tightened, yet she forced her voice calm. Amara said, "Secrets must be faced before they devour us." A vulture circled overhead, and the plateau echoed with silence too heavy to ignore. Night fell fast, cloaking the group in a silence broken only by fire crackles. Amara's voice trembled with doubt, though her eyes stayed steady. Amara said, "If betrayal waits, is it already among us?" Kato shifted, his gaze sharp on Zuberi. Kato said, "We do not need whispers. The enemy sits in shadow." Elder Nia stirred the fire, sparks flying like fleeting stars. Elder Nia said, "Trust bends but must not break, or the curse will feed." Zuberi's jaw tightened, his shadow stretching across the firelight. Zuberi said, "I walk this path, though none of you see me fit." Amara looked into the flames, the reflection of her lineage burning back at her. Amara said, "We are chained by destiny, yet we choose how tightly." The forest beyond seemed to breathe, and the fire swayed as if under watchful eyes. By dawn, the group reached a ravine, its bridge of ropes swaying under cold wind. Amara gripped her staff, eyes fixed on the far side where mist clung like shrouds. Amara said, "This bridge decides if faith outweighs fear." Kato tested the ropes, his boots grinding on wood. Kato said, "It will hold if we do not hesitate." Elder Nia touched the ropes gently, her voice like a calm river. Elder Nia said, "Even the weakest thread carries us when we walk together." Zuberi stepped forward, his smile sharp as a blade. Zuberi said, "Some threads must snap for others to rise." The wind shrieked through the ravine, and the ropes groaned as if warning of hidden choices. Amara's breath tightened, and the journey demanded a step into danger. On the far side of the ravine, ruins sprawled beneath vines, their stones carved with forgotten faces. Amara touched one, her hand trembling at its cold truth. Amara said, "These are the faces of those who fell to betrayal." Elder Nia traced a faded glyph, her voice hushed. Elder Nia said, "The prophecy warned of kin who carved their names with blood." Kato prowled the edges, spear gleaming in pale light. Kato said, "The ground feels restless, like something buried wakes beneath us." Zuberi lingered near a broken pillar, his eyes flicking away from the group. Zuberi said, "Perhaps the prophecy warns against blind faith, not blood." The wind moaned through hollow stone, carrying echoes like whispered accusations. Amara stood taller, though doubt knotted her chest. The sky darkened before its time, storm clouds boiling as thunder clawed at the ruins. Amara raised her staff, her voice steady against the roar. Amara said, "The curse stirs. We must claim our strength now." Elder Nia's staff struck earth, sparks flaring. Elder Nia said, "The test begins, and shadows will demand their price." Kato lifted his spear, muscles taut. Kato said, "Let them come. They will break on my guard." Zuberi stepped back, eyes sharp with conflict, his voice edged. Zuberi said, "Strength divides as much as it unites." Lightning split the sky, throwing faces into sharp relief. Amara's chest burned with both fear and courage, knowing the journey had turned darker than ever. The cavern yawned like the mouth of an ancient beast, its walls glowing faintly with veins of ember light. Amara stepped forward, her staff trembling in her grip, though her eyes were steady. Amara said, "This place breathes fire older than kingdoms." Elder Nia's voice echoed like a hymn inside the chamber. Elder Nia said, "The flame hides its trial behind shadow and heat." Kato planted his spear and scanned the shadows where the glow twisted. Kato said, "If something moves in there, it will find me waiting." Zuberi lingered at the edge, eyes flickering with doubt and envy. Zuberi said, "Perhaps the flame only devours those too eager." The air thickened, sweat clinging to skin, the sound of a distant heartbeat thudding through stone. Amara pressed her palm to the cavern wall, feeling its rhythm answer her own, and for a moment, she feared her blood would ignite. The cavern roared alive as the embers flared, fire spirits rising like molten silhouettes. Amara steadied her stance, voice clear despite the heat. Amara said, "I will face what the flame demands." Elder Nia's staff struck stone, sparks shooting outward. Elder Nia said, "Remember, strength is not in steel, but in spirit." Kato lunged forward, spear slashing through flickering forms. Kato said, "Then I will carve a path through their fire." Zuberi hesitated, eyes darting as sweat streamed down his brow. Zuberi said, "You risk burning for shadows that do not answer." The fire spirits hissed, circling tighter, their heat pulling breath from lungs. Amara closed her eyes and lifted her staff, letting her heartbeat match the rhythm of the flame, until its glow gathered in her chest like dawn breaking through storm. The spirits shattered into sparks, but one remained, towering and crowned with flame. Amara staggered, her staff vibrating with heat. Amara said, "This is the trial's heart." Elder Nia's eyes narrowed, her voice steady. Elder Nia said, "You must not strike. Bind with your spirit, not your hand." Kato braced himself between Amara and the blazing figure. Kato said, "Then I will hold the fire back until her spirit speaks." The flame spirit leaned close, its breath searing. Zuberi's voice hissed, torn between envy and awe. Zuberi said, "If she fails, the flame will choose another." Amara's chest heaved, her fear pressing heavy, but she stepped forward, staff lowered. Amara said, "I offer not my strength, but my truth." The spirit's fire surged, wrapping her in a halo that burned without consuming, and silence broke heavier than thunder. The fire dimmed and bent inward, forming a small flame in Amara's palm, its warmth pulsing like a heartbeat. Amara gasped, her face wet with tears and sweat. Amara said, "It accepts me." Elder Nia's shoulders softened as relief spread through her. Elder Nia said, "The ancestors breathe through you now." Kato lowered his spear, his voice steady but proud. Kato said, "No blade could guard as strong as your spirit just did." Zuberi turned sharply, his words sharp as flint. Zuberi said, "One flame cannot heal what men will still destroy." The cavern exhaled as if satisfied, ember veins fading into stone silence. Amara closed her hand gently, her chest heavy with both triumph and dread. Amara said, "The trial was victory, but its weight is greater than any loss." Outside the cavern, night blanketed the sky, stars glimmering like witnesses. Amara stepped into the open, the flame flickering in her palm, its glow spilling across her face. Amara said, "This light belongs not to me, but to Ndiwa." Elder Nia raised her staff, her voice solemn and strong. Elder Nia said, "The kingdom's hope now beats in your hands." Kato stood guard at her side, his chest swelling with pride. Kato said, "We will carry it through every storm until it burns in its rightful place." Zuberi lingered at the rear, his silence louder than words, his eyes dark with unspoken schemes. The wind stirred gently, carrying the flame's warmth across the stones, and for a moment the land itself seemed to sigh in fragile relief. The road back to Ndiwa carried a silence heavier than drums, and the air smelled of storms brewing. Amara held the eternal flame close, its glow hidden beneath her hand. Amara said, "This light must return to our people, or all is lost." Elder Nia walked with her staff steady, her gaze fixed forward. Elder Nia said, "The closer we draw, the stronger the curse thrashes." Kato scanned the horizon, muscles taut like a bowstring. Kato said, "The land itself resists us. Danger waits in every shadow." Zuberi trailed behind, his eyes sharp, his mouth tight with secrets. Zuberi said, "Perhaps the land fears what happens when the flame returns." The wind rose, carrying the faint scent of smoke and ash. Amara's heart raced, knowing Ndiwa waited ahead, but so did the storm of betrayal. At the edge of the kingdom, fires licked the horizon where fields once grew green. Amara stopped, grief etching her eyes. Amara said, "The land cries for water, but drinks only flame." Elder Nia touched the scorched earth, ash clinging to her fingers. Elder Nia said, "The curse has already feasted here." Kato's knuckles whitened around his spear, rage trembling in his stance. Kato said, "Someone fed this fire, this is no accident." Zuberi shifted, his expression unreadable, his voice low. Zuberi said, "Sometimes sacrifice demands ash before growth." Amara's chest burned with fury and fear, the eternal flame pulsing stronger as if answering destruction with defiance. The wind stung their faces with smoke, and silence clung heavier than death. As night deepened, the group camped on broken ground, flames flickering weak against the dark. Amara stared into the eternal flame, its glow restless. Amara said, "Why does it feel heavier the closer we come?" Elder Nia's voice was calm, steady like riverstone. Elder Nia said, "Truth nears its unveiling. The flame carries the weight of what waits." Kato leaned close, his eyes narrowing. Kato said, "Something stalks us. I hear steps beyond the fire." Zuberi's lips curled into a smirk that did not reach his eyes. Zuberi said, "Perhaps the enemy already shares our fire." Amara's skin prickled as she felt the truth coil between them. Sparks from the fire drifted upward, swallowed by a sky void of stars. By dawn, the group reached Ndiwa's gates, but the village no longer sang with life. Smoke curled from shattered huts, and silence stretched across broken streets. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Amara said, "Who has done this?" Elder Nia pressed her staff into the soil, her voice breaking. Elder Nia said, "The kingdom's heart bleeds from within." Kato moved ahead, his rage barely caged. Kato said, "This is Obas's doing. His hunger poisoned the land." Zuberi's eyes flickered, his tone edged like a blade. Zuberi said, "Power chooses where it belongs. And perhaps it no longer belongs here." Amara's grip tightened on the flame, its glow flaring against her palm, refusing silence. The villagers gathered in fear, their eyes hollow, as Obasi emerged, draped in crimson and gold, his voice smooth as oil. Obasi said, "The flame is mine. It belongs to those strong enough to wield it." Amara's chest surged with fury, her voice sharp. Amara said, "The flame is not for crowns or hunger, it is for life." Elder Nia struck her staff, her words fierce. Elder Nia said, "You defy the ancestors and chain yourself to ruin." Kato stepped forward, spear leveled. Kato said, "One more step, and I spill your arrogance." Zuberi's silence echoed, his eyes caught between loyalty and betrayal. Obasi's laughter rang like iron striking stone, and the villagers trembled, caught between hope and despair. The storm crowned the sky, thunder growling over Ndiwa, as Obasi stood tall in crimson and gold, the villagers cowering behind him. Amara's hand clenched the flame, its glow trembling like her breath. Amara said, "This is not your crown to claim." Obasi's smile cut like a knife. Obasi said, "Power bows to will, not to myths bound in dust." Elder Nia lifted her staff, her voice unyielding. Elder Nia said, "The ancestors reject those who twist their gifts." Kato stepped forward, spear aimed steady. Kato said, "Your hunger ends tonight." Zuberi lingered between light and shadow, torn in silence. The villagers whispered like reeds in wind, caught between fear and hope, as the sky split with lightning. Obasi's voice roared above thunder as he spread his arms wide. Obasi said, "With or without your flame, Ndiwa will kneel." Amara stepped forward, the flame blazing brighter in her palm. Amara said, "The land kneels only to those who honor it." Elder Nia struck her staff on stone, sparks bursting upward. Elder Nia said, "The ancestors stand now in judgment." Kato's eyes sharpened as he took position at Amara's side. Kato said, "Strike, and you face all of us." Zuberi's breath hitched, torn between envy and loyalty. The villagers gasped as the flame flared, spilling light across their hollow faces, forcing shadows back into corners. The clash came like thunder itself. Kato lunged at Obasi's guards, steel meeting steel in sparks. Kato said, "No shadow crosses this line." Amara raised her staff high, the flames swelling until it lit the entire square. Amara said, "This light belongs to the people." Elder Nia's chants thundered with unseen voices, the air vibrating with ancestral hymns. Elder Nia said, "The curse breaks through sacrifice, not greed." Obasi drew a blade, gold inlaid, his face twisted in fury. Obasi said, "Then burn with your ancestors." Zuberi's hands trembled, his eyes burning with choice as battle raged around him. The flame's light flared, wrapping Amara in a halo, but Obasi charged, blade raised. Amara whispered, "Ancestors guide me." Elder Nia's chant broke into silence, her eyes locking with Amara's. Elder Nia said, "Now, child, choose your path." Kato blocked a strike, meant for her, his grunt filled with pain, but his stance unbroken. Kato said, "Stand, Amara. Stand for all of us." Zuberi screamed, torn between blood and betrayal, and finally stepped forward. Zuberi said, "Enough." Obasi's blade froze mid-air as the flame surged outward, light swallowing shadow. The storm broke open, rain pouring like tears of the land itself. Silence followed as Obasi fell to his knees, the blade slipping from his hand, eyes hollow with defeat. The flame settled into Amara's chest, glowing steady like dawn. Amara said, "The kingdom is not mine, it is ours." Elder Nia's shoulders sank with relief, her staff lowering. Elder Nia said, "The land breathes again." Kato leaned on his spear, weary but smiling faintly. Kato said, "Ndiwa stands because of you." Zuberi turned away, shame pulling at his face, yet a spark of hope lingering. The villagers knelt, not in fear, but in reverence. Above them the storm cleared, leaving stars burning bright.